Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a wonderful time at the AI Summit so far. I would like to welcome you to this afternoon session on using AI in a principled way. My name is Mahtab Sarvmaili. I'm a new assistant professor at Faculty of Computer Science at UMB, and I will be hosting our honorable guest to this talk. Our goal for today's session is to examine the multifaceted challenges of ethical AI adoption, covering responsibility and control, equitable access, localizing classroom applications, and evolving university models to ensure principled, practical, and future-ready implementation. Our first speaker for today's panel is Dr. Stuart Thiel from the Faculty of Computer Science from University of Fredericton. His works combine technical depth with a strong focus on pedagogy, professional preparation, and applied computing. He is also known for his open source work, including ChessMod for Minecraft. Dr. Thiel's talk, titled as AI Can Generate Code, that's why computer science matters more than ever. As a computer scientist and as a computer engineer, we would be so excited to hear about this. Please join me welcoming Dr. Thiel. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Could you see the inflammatory titles? Excellent. I thought that would go better, but it's not that racy. Thanks everyone for coming out, and I want to thank Alok, who's not here right now, for personally chasing after me to make sure I showed up. He drove me here today so I wouldn't get out of it. I'm going to move through this at a good clip. You might ask, where's the fire? And that also would have been a great talk for title for this talk. A key thing when speaking about generative AI, and when I say AI throughout this talk, I mean generative AI today, is we all have different understandings of where things are at. And a common vocabulary is good. I liked how our keynote this morning mentioned that it's useful to be able to talk to folks about AI in a useful fashion. A simple example can be powerful, but simple doesn't have to mean inarticulate. I've already had some good talks with folks today. I saw Danny Silver come up the stair and then he turned around. But every year at these things, starting last year, I talked to him for a few minutes. He has a fascinating, like OG hipster AI. Is he here? It's on the PowerPoint? No, we're on the title. It's okay. It's okay. We're on the title. But I was talking to him, and he brought up a useful bit of vocabulary that had me run back to my office and adjust my presentation a little bit. So I want to shout out that if you have a chance to talk to Danny Silver, he's great. He's been in this space for a long, long time. Without further ado, boom. See, not as racy discussion of fire as you might have thought. Somewhere between the ages of 4 and 6, I decided I wanted to be a fireman. Maybe it was the idea of saving lives, maybe I liked the truck, or maybe I just liked fires and had badly misunderstood the role. I ended up taking a very different path, and I have a much better appreciation now for how complex that role actually is. Most people here probably have a pretty good idea of what a firefighter does, certainly better than I did when I was 5. But as usual, the obvious version of the job is only the surface. At the same time, everyone also has a pretty good idea of what a fire extinguisher is. You see my notes? Oh, that's what you meant. Now, the question is, if I do this, what do you... Guess what, folks? I'm reading from my slides. Where am I at? All right. But anyways, at the same time, everyone has a good idea of what a fire extinguisher is. Puts out fires, it's right there in the name. And in the right context, a fire extinguisher can be extremely effective. We all know where I'm going here, right? Excellent. With some fires, like grease fires, having the right tool matters a lot. But we all understand almost instinctively that we can't replace fire departments with well-placed fire extinguishers. Now, fire extinguisher placement is required in many settings, but it's a mitigation strategy. It lowers risk, it may prevent small emergencies from becoming large ones, or it may buy time until the fire department arrives to handle the issue properly. We also don't rush to equip firefighters with consumer fire extinguishers, then declare that we've made the firefighters more effective. A consumer fire extinguisher might be useful in narrow situations, but it's not what makes a firefighter a firefighter. And we certainly wouldn't imagine taking a bunch of different fire extinguishers, smushing them together, putting a helmet on top and saying, this is great, each fire extinguisher is good at a different kind of fire. That's obviously ridiculous. It's even more obvious when we remember that firefighters don't just put out fires in houses. They don't only rescue cats from trees, and as the picture shows, it's a very bad idea to use a fire extinguisher for that. Fire departments show up quickly under pressure in situations where the person making the 911 call might not actually fully understand what's happening. I've experienced that myself with my family more than once. The fire department, they rolled up quickly, and I'm really glad for the training they had. Then there are broader emergencies that have become increasingly familiar during Canadian summers: wildfires, smoke events, evacuations, regional crises, and we're looking at another hot summer. If we replace the fire department with fire extinguishers, we wouldn't just lose people who respond to burning buildings. We lose a system around them, the response capacity, the judgment, the coordination, and the public trust. That brings us to the next point. The fire departments aren't just brave people with access to hoses. There's a structure there. The details vary by province, municipality, and department size. Like a small rural volunteer department won't look exactly like a large urban fire service. But the key point is that it's still a structured domain. Fire service have entry pathways, shared standards, distinct roles. The system already recognizes different kinds of preparation, qualification, responsibility, and authority. So responding to fire isn't a single generic job, it's a bunch of related roles. And this matters because you don't get experienced firefighters by skipping inexperienced firefighters. You need early career firefighters who could move through the pipeline shown here, trained, supervised, corrected, and gradually trusted with more responsibility. They don't arrive on day one ready to lead a crew, inspect a building, investigate a cause, or make command decisions during a crisis. One recruitment guide I looked at, and I just took a screenshot here, it talked about like 240 hours of training, followed by probation, certification, ongoing weekly training, and limits to what hazardous work they're allowed to do initially. And that's the point. We don't hand someone a fire extinguisher on their first day, point them at a burning building and say, good news, this tool is very powerful, so you can skip the training. The tool might be useful. The tool may even be essential in the right context, but usefulness is not the same as readiness. So let's talk about computer science. In this analogy, obviously, computer scientists are the firefighters. Anyone here is a computer scientist? Do you feel like you spend most of your time putting out fires? No? Not a good laugh there, that's rough. But, obviously generative AI is the fire extinguisher. And I know the analogy is not perfect. And I'm going to come back to that because the ways the analogy breaks are important. But first, I want to dig into the parts that do work. When people talk about AI and computer science right now, they often focus on programming. More specifically, they focus on code generation. And those are real capabilities. They matter. I use these tools. My colleagues use these tools. My students use these tools. But they can be genuinely helpful. But reducing computer science to producing code that works is a little like reducing firefighting to pointing water at flames. It's not entirely wrong. It's just so incomplete that it becomes misleading. Computer science is a lot more than programming. The field spans theory, systems, software, people, security, data, hardware, society. It covers a lot of ground. Even inside programming, producing good code is only one small part of the job. A good computer scientist or a good software developer has to understand what problem is actually being solved. They have to notice when the stated problem is not the real problem. They have to recognize hidden requirements, environmental constraints, and consequences outside of the formal scope. They have to ask, what happens when the data is messy? Or when the users misunderstand the interface? When the system is attacked? Or the organization changes? When the code has to be maintained by someone else? Or when the thing that worked in a demo becomes infrastructure that everybody is relying on? The kind of judgment that creates a good computer scientist doesn't come from nowhere. It's built through experience, through doing, through getting things wrong when the consequences are bounded enough that you could learn from the mistake and not immediately be fired. It's built through reading bad code, knowing that some of it was yours. It's built through debugging something that feels impossible to solve, maintaining something you thought was done, or explaining a design decision to someone who doesn't care how elegant it is, they just need it to serve the people who rely on it. And that's how early career programmers become senior developers. That's how students become computer scientists. That's how people develop the ability to judge whether an AI-generated answer is useful, misleading, unsafe, biased, or just outright wrong. So when we say AI can write code, so maybe we don't need many computer scientists, we need to be very careful, because senior developers don't hatch from eggs. Senior computer scientists don't appear fully formed just because the market needs them. They're produced by systems that let people gain experience. If we remove too much of the doing, particularly from early career roles and education, then we may get short-term efficiency, but we may also create the longer-term risk of shrinking the future pool of people who could tell if what's actually being produced is good. And this is the part we should be worried about. Not because AI is useless, it's definitely not. And not because using AI is cheating, because that's too simplistic. And not because computer science has never changed. It's kind of changed a lot. And computer science has changed constantly. The examples here all changed what it meant to build, learn, manage, rely on software. But none of these changes made computer science disappear. They changed the work, they changed the expectations, and they changed the failure modes. And in many cases, they made the need for doing the work properly even more obvious. That guy there is totally sold on what I'm saying. I don't know about the rest of you. AI is another massive shift, but it's arriving with a very tempting story attached to it. The story is the tool can do the work. And sometimes, yeah, absolutely, it can. But we need to ask which work. Everything on this slide is real. These are useful capabilities. AI can do this. In some cases, AI's use here is genuinely transformative. So the point is not that AI has no place in computer science. It totally does. The point is that usefulness is not the same thing as professional judgment. The harder question is, what happens when we move from producing output to owning consequences? It's good, I've been signaled. That's where the story starts to break down. AI can produce confident language about context, risk, ethics, maintenance, and impact. It can write very convincing paragraphs about any of this. But the crypt notes don't get us all the way. It doesn't decide what should be built. It doesn't become responsible for the consequences. And it doesn't replace the experience needed to understand why a technically correct answer might still be wrong for the situation. It's not an experienced computer scientist. It's not mentorship, it's not accountability, and it's definitely not public trust. This is where the firefighter analogy needs to bend a little. Generative AI is more broadly useful than a fire extinguisher. It can support many kinds of work, not just one narrow emergency response. So I'm not arguing that generative AI is a gimmick. And I'm not arguing that we should lock it in a glass case and only break it out during emergencies. The tool is useful. That's totally not the debate. What I'm arguing is that we need to stop confusing capability with competence, we need to stop confusing output with expertise, and we need to stop confusing tool access with role formation. That's the distinction we've been circling since the fire extinguisher. The tool can do some impressive things, but that doesn't mean it replaces judgment, responsibility, training, or experience around the role. As faculty, we need to teach students how to use AI, but also when not to use it. They need to know how to question it, test it, constrain it, document it, and recognize it where it may be hiding complexity. We also need to preserve the parts of learning where struggle is not a bug, but it's the mechanism by which evaluative judgment develops. In industry, that means being cautious about cutting away the roles that produce future expertise. If junior work gets entirely automated away, organizations will later discover that they have fewer people capable of reviewing, securing, maintaining, or even governing what the tool is trying to produce. And in academia, our job is not simply to detect AI use. We shouldn't just go about banning AI use, and I'm not arguing that we just celebrate it all the time. Our job is to respond with structure. The structure starts with categorizing risk clearly, enough that we can respond proportionately. Some uses are low risk, like writing an email. Some are high risk. Some support learning, and some undermine it. Some are appropriate for one course, one assignment, or one stage of learning, and inappropriate for another. Fear of AI is often amorphous. Everything gets smashed together into one panic-shaped object. But we can't govern a blur. We need names for risks, levels of responsibility, training, supervision, escalation paths, and rules to distinguish support from substitution. That's not anti-AI, that's responsible adoption. So, the fire extinguisher belongs on the wall. People should know where it is, how to use it, and when it's the right tool. And people should know when the situation has moved beyond that tool and requires trained professionals. Generative AI belongs in computer science too, but it belongs there as a powerful tool inside a professional and educational structure, not as a replacement for that structure. The future we want is not one where we have fewer people who understand computing. It's one where more people understand computing better, use powerful tools more responsibly, and develop the judgment to know when the situation is bigger than the tool. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thiel. That was such an insightful talk. We are open for the questions.
Uh-oh.
Thank you. Thank you for your description. A very chaotic situation we are facing as educators. Can you name one example you use in the classroom to teach students how to use AI in the right way?
Ooh, that's tricky. I do asynchronous teaching now, but when I was doing live classroom examples, and I could record it, but in a live session, I would regularly walk students through a problem, and I'd pull up ChatGPT, and I'd say, this is the coding problem we have. We are not writing code, and we will not ask for code from the AI. I would specifically make them walk through a description of what they were trying to do. Explain what you're trying to do. Explain what you think went wrong and explain what you're trying to get. Many of you know that when you go through that process of trying to put that together in your head, most of the time the students are, oh, that's what I did, and they've solved their own problem. That's the first step. If they manage to get all of that out in the prompt, and at the beginning they say, don't show me any code, I'm trying to learn, and at the end they say, remember, don't show me any code, I just want to understand how to think about this better. They hit enter, and that's the beginning. The response that they get there isn't the answer. I teach them to follow up, keep pushing, keep asking questions, have a conversation with the generative AI. Because you can have a conversation every time saying, don't show me any code, I'm trying to learn how to think about this. And that has been really, really effective.
Thank you.
How many people here have used that strategy in their classrooms? Do we have a few folks who have tried that? Do I have the industry crowd here? That's interesting. Please. Your industry crowd, that wasn't a question? Excellent. Same for you, Dave? Yeah, it's good.
Any more questions from the audience? I just have one question myself.
Oh, yeah, please.
So what do you recommend to a computer science student that is starting this journey now because they are really worried about the outcome of the AI and their impact on the job that they can find?
Like I'm saying here, we're not doing away with computer science. We're not doing away with software development roles. We'll probably actually need more of them. They do need the AI skills. They should learn how to do the magic box stuff that AI gives you. But they shouldn't start there. They have to go through that struggle on their own. You have to tell them that they have to struggle early. When we ask a student in an assignment to write us a small, trivial program, it's not because the world needs more of those small, trivial programs. The product of that assignment is them struggling through that and developing the judgment and the experience. For the first year or two of their computer science degree, they should be looking to do that. They should be eagerly chasing that struggle. No pain, no gain. But then in the later part of their career, they have to start using these new tools. They have to learn to try it out and say, I've done stuff before. How could I evaluate the response I'm getting from the AI? When is it going to do something that takes more time than it's worth for me to do, and I could get a benefit here? They need that experience, and that's a separate type of judgment that they need to develop through doing in the later part of their program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You so much.
Go ahead, Dave.
Thank you. When I started learning computer science a long time ago, we started with machine language and assembly language. So you had to understand all that stuff.
Yes.
Eventually, we went to Fortran, which was amazing. So, but now I doubt there's a lot of computer scientists that do anything in assembly language. You don't really need to understand that. Is that correct? And so now they just don't use it anymore. And I'm just wondering, with the AI tools, maybe you don't need to know how to program anymore. Is that going to eventually happen?
I'm biased. I was Concordia University's last assembly language TA almost. That's not true. They changed the program. They still do it. But I still think you need to teach students assembly language. You still need to teach them what logic gates are and how that builds into stuff like adders and ripple adders. Not because they're going to do that all the time, but they have to know where they came from. They have to know what the underlying stuff is. And for teaching them assembly language, if you make them go through that a little bit, when they get to any other programming language, they're like, yeah, this isn't that bad. Which is like, that's half the war right there, won. But they need to go through that process. And those small bounded pieces of suffering will help them grow. Boundless suffering is not good for the students. You can't have them struggle forever. But I see a movement away from that, but they still need to see it. Computer science is the hardware, the software, how they interact, and how people are interacting with it. You can't cut out a section because it's inconvenient, and a magic box will solve the problems for us. I know that you're sold on that idea, but I hope you like the answer.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you, Dr. Thiel, for such an insightful talk. Before I introduce our next speaker, I should mention that for the audience who prefers a more quiet room, we have the C11 room that you can use, and it's overflow room. It's a good AC, and I hope that you would like it. Our next speaker is Dr. Christopher Power. Dr. Power is a professor of mathematical and computational sciences at the University of Prince Edward Island and one of Canada's leading researchers on accessible technology design. His work has focused on closing the gap between what the technology promises and what disabled people actually experience. The talk title is Accessible Design of AI, Access is Not Enough. Dr. Power, we would like to welcome you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I tested this before. Are you getting my slides? Are you getting my notes? All right, here we go. Very good. Thanks very much for the introduction. Thank you all for coming. This is a great audience. I was told that my voice might disappear with the noise down there. If you do, please just raise your hand and just wave at me, and I'll speak louder and use diction. So what I'm trying to do today is I'm looking to discuss with you about accessible technology and where the implications of AI are around this. Much of our history in accessible design has not been. We've moved technology forward and left people behind. And we have the risk that as we move forward, we will do that again, but now at speed. Now, we've done work to try to catch up in each industry, and most of my career has been spent looking at different types of technologies and then catching up. But AI is more of a shift that's similar to the CRT screen being introduced over punch cards in comparison to, say, the web. So when I say that, what I mean is not only is the content and the medium changing, but there'll be new ways to exclude people. So in the 1960s, there was a large cohort of blind programmers who worked on punch cards. And in 1971, when the CRT screen was introduced with the command line, all of those people lost their jobs. That is a real story. Lovely book called Disabled by Design, if you want to give it a read, telling those sorts of stories. But my goal today is to try to demonstrate a broader view, and I'm talking to technology people, but also people who are legislators or policy writers, educators who are thinking about some of these problems. So I'm going to give you a scenario today. We're going to have Maple Tree Consulting, and they're going to meet AI. They're going to have their policy experts use a new AI tool. I'm not going to go too far into it other than to say that it summarizes things. I think probably that's a safe phrase to use. And we're going to use two personas. One is Marcus, he, him, age 52. He's a senior policy analyst, and he identifies as blind and as a disabled person, and he uses a screen reader and braille display. He is a very competent, very experienced policy analyst who uses assistive technology in his everyday work. He is an expert user in those technologies. And also Robin, they, them pronouns, who is 24, who's a policy analyst, and identifies as being neurodivergent, but not as having a disability. They have an identity to them that is different than Marcus's, and they have different needs and preferences, but they do not necessarily identify as being a disabled person. So let's assume that Maple Tree Consulting is aware. I was going to make this a life insurance example at one point, so if you see life show up, that's why. My first job was in life insurance, but we'll stick with the consulting company. So when we look at the barriers, when the new tool is introduced, Marcus might encounter some technical barriers. His assistive technology, which is very common, will have a conflict, a mismatch between what his needs are with the technology and the new technology. This is normally solved by using things like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines or other technical aspects that allow us to fix that problem. These are sort of classic technical barriers, but they create an interaction problem. You can't get information in or out of the machine. Before you ever try to engage with a task, you simply cannot get the information. Now, that point of interaction barrier doesn't happen to Robin. Robin uses a variety of different tools, very similar to what I use here. And as a result, that barrier doesn't exist for Robin. But we can fix it by identifying that interaction gap. And this technical accessibility problem is one that we've run into for, well, 30 years. 1999, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines started codifying some of these things. 97 was the first time we used the term accessibility when it came to digital systems. And as a result, we start seeing in terms of an actual formal accessibility definition coming out of libraries at the time, Mike Paciello's paper at that time. But 30 years of work, we now kind of have that sorted out, although it's complicated, and I won't go into that. That's a whole different set of lectures. But when we look at these problems that have been solved, this is where a lot of development ends. A lot of developers see their job as ending as getting information in and out. But there's other gaps that appear. So as soon as I fix that problem, there can be competence gaps that appear as barriers for people, where they can't use the competence that they've developed, translate it through the machine to be able to do the activities they need. These are concepts from usability, typically around effectiveness and efficiency. These are tools that for those of you who are in user experience or have touched with user experience, or also marketing, we talk about these things quite a lot as well. It's a pathway through the technology to an outcome of some kind. So even if I get access to that technical piece, there might be parts that cause usability problems. A classic one for blind users throughout the web was that I would have to start at the top of the page and go all the way to the bottom. And even though I have tools that would allow me as a blind user and screen reader user to jump around headings if they were present, if the headings are not semantically coded properly, you cannot get to them. So I had a good friend, Kevin Carey, who said to me once, well, you can say it's fine and it's accessible, Chris, but if it takes you 5 minutes to submit your taxes and it takes me 30, how is that equitable? Sort of characterizing that it would take him a great deal of time to move through, at that time, what was the UK's tax system. So when we're looking at technology as a mediator, as a translation to that, again, this was sort of 2006, 2008. I show up, it's very exciting. And we have a pathway through where we start adding these usability ideas to accessibility as a concept. Those debates continue, again, other lectures, happy to talk about that. But today I want to focus on the AI issues that are different. So this competence gap talks about task completion. And that's where a lot of my field, talking about user experience, working with UX designers, is about the technology mediating something. So whether you're listening to music on your phone or taking pictures, our technology is helping us do things. Well, that's about participation. And that participation has expanded in different ways from the 1990s forward. We heard this morning some of the history around different technologies and how they've been introduced in ways that are helpful and sometimes detrimental. But it's not just enough for people to be completing a task. There are other aspects of it. That same gentleman, Kevin Carey, we were once standing outside of an art display at an art gallery that was closed, and we were looking in the window. And he said, Chris, could you tell me a little bit about the picture that you see? And I explained, oh, well, it's an abstract painting that has a blue stripe and a white stripe, and then there's a green stripe going across it. And Kevin listened very dutifully and then said, Chris, I'm sure everything you told me was technically accurate. You've told me nothing about that painting, and then walked down the road. And I went, oh, I wonder what that meant. And I started thinking about experience and the need to have experiences through technology. And that was one of the reasons I ended up in digital gaming or video games. That was one of the places I worked for a long time, where we don't have a goal like paying your taxes. It's about experience. It's about participating in something that you value and having meaning. And the question I started asking was, with AI, well, if I step back and say in the competence gap, what are the things that were preventing it? Well, if we thin out text and make it one big long package of text, it ruins competence, but also it's removing that person from participating. Similarly, if it starts to, in a workflow, require lots of attention in that workflow. And if someone does not have that type of work pattern, it's excluding in a different way. The competence isn't coming through, but also they're potentially not participating. And when we talk about that, Marcus and Robin, they're both analysts. They want to do their jobs. They want to put together briefs. They want to do presentations. They want to participate as part of the team equally. And if the tools that we're using are flattening their text or taking away their voice or excluding in other ways, we end up having interesting problems. Now I sound like I'm just sort of talking about, well, we need to include people. And yeah, that's great. That's really important. But my argument is that AI actually introduces a number of new problems that are really challenging and not things that we've encountered before. So we have fidelity barriers. Fidelity barriers are those where the summaries and ways that it generates information, if you're using it as sort of an AI like this, it provides a less complete view of the information. The fidelity is around whether or not it's an authentic experience to the person as everyone else would have. I have the ability with a summary maybe to go back and check for different aspects of headings in the original documents or link into them. If those aspects are taking time or not available for some reason, even though it is technically still possible to do the job and do the task, you lose some of the fidelity around that mediation. There's also labeling barriers. So we're seeing things like AI detection tools, and there's lots of debates about those in education, but also in work, about what is the right amount we should be using different tools. Hey, there's a token budget. What are you doing? Kind of problems that are just now starting to emerge. Well, in the case of Marcus, if he's using a lot more interactions to be able to even get the information, he's now using maybe an uneven number of tokens. Those tools start exposing his disability and his access, his needs as a problem. And now we have alienated someone in a different way, but also highlighted to the rest of the team potentially that there's a problem. Robin, on the other hand, if there's a policy in place and Robin relies on these tools as a technology that's helping them perform, and this again is from someone who does not identify as having a disability, but it's now key to what they're doing, and we introduce a policy that says, hey, anything that has AI touch it, you've got to have a second sign off. Well, now we've got someone who needs a tool that has potentially been excluded in a different way from Marcus. We also have stigma barriers, which emerge in different ways. So stigma barriers, your briefs got faster, someone says to Marcus, and it's because of AI. Well, now Marcus's hard-won skills have now been allocated to a tool, and it's like, that's great, the tool helped you. Now it's undone some of the independence that Marcus has gained. Whereas for ADHD or another type of neurodivergence, those are already invisible disabilities that a lot of people don't believe exist. Oh, well, everybody's a little bit ADHD, you may hear someone say. Those sorts of things are dehumanizing and problematic. And if someone says, oh, well, is that even your work? Because you relied on an AI, that has a different landing for someone who has that sort of disability in comparison to someone who does not. So you end up with these very interesting tensions that are challenging and hard to deal with. And then there's representation barriers. Our AIs potentially put out information that are normative to different aspects of the average. We have data sets that are selected, different types of features that are put in them for training our models. If they're not representative of what our human society represents as a whole, but instead isolate different portions, you start with Marcus generating things that say, oh, they review the slides or watch the presentation or see the data in his summaries, which are a different type of dehumanizing and representation. So why is AI different, though? It seems like these are things that we could design out. We've done this, again, for quite a long time now. Well, number one, I feel that a lot of those barriers that we're encountering are new because the machine is doing it themselves. We're not having someone programming it in. We can go train them, don't do that, and then also have evaluation and means of remediating. But also, we have technology that is now more integrated into the activity. We're having those past interfaces that were a conduit and a mediator for our outcomes. Instead, we have new omissions for Marcus, where maybe parts are being removed without him realizing it, so he cannot access it. On the other hand, it might be that it distorts in a different way, as Robin experienced. When we start seeing the social environment, it's also moving inside the technology. It's no longer the case that you can have training sessions like I've done in gaming around sensitivity of language and train the developers and designers to be able to use language properly. If the AI tool is unfortunately not representative of our society, it maybe pushes things into the space, or we're not able to potentially have it pull the model out to be able to fix it. If it's millions of dollars and many, many person hours to build a model, trying to remediate it down the road is going to be almost impossible. So these are really interesting and different challenges, but there's also the apparent human volition, that meaning and interest and desire to do something, where AI is now replacing what was a mediation with taking different pieces of it in ownership. And this mirrors some of the ownership pieces that we've talked about in other spaces, but with disability, it hits differently. There are just different lived experiences that people have that we need to be thinking and talking about. And then there's longitudinal and unpredictable barriers. One of the things I think about a lot is I've spent a lot of time fixing accessibility problems on the web. If I fix them, most of the time, the person can use it. Or if it's predictable, I have lots of friends who use screen readers who learn, oh, well, if I'm going to the government website, I know I have to jump to the bottom and I'll find the button I need. AI maybe doesn't work that way. And so we have new, different, unpredictable, probabilistic accessibility problems that could appear. And that's something that I think is a real interesting challenge. Just trying to move along a little bit here. I will move a little bit quicker because I can feel myself slowing down on points. We need to think about how to design these things. And instead of talking about designing technology, I propose that we need to be thinking about designing activities. So if you have a broad activity, that activity comes with both the people, the context, and the technology it's mediating through, and the thing the person wants to do. So you have 4 different areas, and there's tensions between all of these different things. You see a person, technology, the social environment they're in, and their outcome. And the technical interaction barriers we know how to fix mostly. Similarly, the competence barriers, this is where we've sat. But then we have a whole lot of other things that sit between that we've never touched in a lot of our guidance, a lot of the ways that we try to fix things, a lot of the way that we try to design, the design languages we use, the design processes. The fidelity barriers that flatten things so we can't see them, the labeling barriers where we've unintentionally highlighted someone through policy, legislation, or other aspects, representation barriers that sit within the technology themselves, and then stigma barriers that are between us as humans. These are things that we need to start tackling in different ways. So when we're looking at the technology context, we have to look at how do we embed representative data within the models? How do we design interfaces that are compensating or mediating in different ways, predicting where the predictions are going to go wrong, if you will, but also looking at those barriers of representation, labeling, and fidelity in the interface themselves, and how can we remediate those problems. In the social context, the missing barriers that I've named, they interact with the social context in lots of ways. So it could warp things like our AI legislation and policy if we don't start talking about these problems now. These are not things that sit in the Accessible Canada legislation. No one has discussed them at that level. And if we're going to be updating our legislation for AI, we need to consider these things, especially if we have the unintentional aspect of maybe excluding people from participating by creating a well-meaning policy or law. So just a little bit of closing advice for my audience, because I like to try to provide you with something as a takeaway. For your design teams, start thinking beyond the interface. What's the activity that you're designing for? And think about where those interactions are going to be along those 4 different dimensions and the 6 tensions that sit between them, because that's where barriers are going to emerge. Watch what each fix opens. As I showed at the beginning, fixing the technical barrier opened a competence barrier. Once we fix the competence barrier, then we see all of these other barriers propagating. And indeed, between them, it might be that I fix one aspect of it. For example, I want to make sure that we are not labeling people, but that means maybe it introduces some barrier in the fidelity somehow and propagate different aspects around the circle. Think a lot about what barriers does this introduce during your design reviews, taking that broader section of barriers, and that sort of barrier language has been very successful in the game industry. But also evaluating with disabled communities, because they're the ones that can tell you best if you're hitting the mark or not. For my policy and legislation teams out there, legislation and standards have to be beyond conformance. You have to think about what is the experience and are people participating, or are we just getting it so that they can do something without actually realizing the benefits of it? Don't penalize access. Think really hard, and hopefully we'll develop ideas around how to do this about detection and integrity properly so that it doesn't unintentionally label or exclude people. Mandate accessible participation as accessibility, not conformance testing, but also evaluation with your disabled communities works in policy too. And there's been really good experiences around the world of having those sorts of panels in legislative bodies. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions if I have any remaining time, which I don't think I do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Power, for such a great talk. We have time for maybe a few short questions from the audience.
Sure. Michael.
Thank you, Chris. I'm looking at the barriers you showed us, right? I would say some of them, for example, labeling barriers, right? You can design the interface, et cetera. But some barriers are not easy to overcome. For example, stigma. Do you have any suggestion, recommendation on how to overcome those kind of barriers?
The which barriers, sorry?
For example,
The labeling barriers? So,
I think one is the labeling barriers, the other is stigma.
oh, stigma.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think one of the pieces is with stigma, there is sort of the sensitivity training aspects of understanding what disability is and the impacts of lived experiences, because then what you have is people thinking in the moment of design of both the policies or on the representation side of the technology, and asking those really tough questions. And we have had that experience in the game industry quite a lot. And we've seen the evolution in 10 years of disability not being used, for example, as a piece of horror in many cases. So you don't see many horrific wheelchairs anymore, which was a big thing in the last part of the last decade. So having that and trying to do that piece is important on the representation side in the models. In the stigma side, that's super challenging because that's a lot about culture within your organization. And I do think that we have a lot of that present. The question is what happens when it gets embedded in the tool and how do you interrupt that? There's sort of new conversations that need to be added to that, where we need to talk a lot more about if someone is using these tools, and in particular, if it's for access, that's okay. Like, be careful with what you say. There's a whole new set of language we're probably going to have to develop around that. Yeah. No problem. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Just a general question. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. I've got a
It was
fan
very
here, so
great.
I'm just trying to...
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Thank you for the presentation. It was really great. I just have a question regarding to accessibility. What metrics would you recommend tracking the AI-driven feature that we should use to know whether the AI feature is truly accessible?
Ooh. Okay, so that's a really big question. I'm happy to have a conversation with you afterwards. What I'll do for right now, what I'll say is many of the new barriers we do not have metricized in any way and do not sit in current guidelines. I'm always nervous. I'm kind of known as being a problem person when it comes to guidelines because they give you targets, which then someone told me once you make something a target, it's no longer a measure. So we have to be very careful with that. What I will say is test with your users, get people in, try it out. And as you build the model, if it's generating text, get it using with disabled people to see, they will highlight where these problems are. There's a whole new set of sort of evaluation measures that need to happen there.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yep, no problem.
Thank you so much, Dr. Power, for
Thank
such
you.
a great talk. I would like to introduce our next guest, Mr. Ryan Donaghy. Mr. Donaghy is the Deputy Minister of the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development in New Brunswick. He is the leading efforts to advance AI and digital literacy across K-12 Anglophone education system. The title of Mr. Donaghy's talk is Global Insight, Local Action, Responsible AI Use in the New Brunswick Classroom. We welcome you to the AI Summit. The floor is yours.
Welcome, everyone. So I'm going to talk about the New Brunswick approach, but also how we fit in the global context of education. Every single education system in the world is either reforming or improving or transforming, and it's because the world has changed. Our education systems have been very slow to adapt. So I'll talk about the global organizations and the frameworks that have been put out around AI and how our approach aligns with that. The global trends in education, I've been very fortunate to get to share the stage with some folks from other countries who are also grappling with this. And then I'll go into New Brunswick's digital and AI framework, as well as the integration plans into the curriculum. So the AI frameworks in education that have come out over the last few years, you've got UNESCO, the Australian government has been one of the first to put out a framework, the European Commission, as well as the OECD. And I'm going to talk about the Brookings Institute as well. Mainly because some folks are really focusing on that one, why we shouldn't integrate AI, except it says the exact opposite. So I'll get to that in a sec. So the UNESCO framework for teachers and students really goes into some of the guardrails that we need to have around it, the guidance of how to use it in the classroom. The Australian government focused on ethical use of AI in the classroom. The European Commission put out some really good foundational pieces on teacher PL, which is critically important. And the OECD has put out a full framework that we align but adapted to the New Brunswick context. I will stop myself on the Brookings Institute again. Everything that is in there about cognitive offload is absolutely true. If you leave the education system exactly as it is and you allow AI to be layered over it without changing anything, which is where we are today. 80%, and I think that's low, of students use it. 75% or so of teachers use it, but we lack guardrails, we lack the change in the education system to adapt to it, and we definitely lack changing assessment to take it into account. So AI in education, you have AI literacy as a core competency. You have a need for large-scale professional learning. The students and the teachers are learning at the same time, and sometimes the students right now are ahead of the teachers. You have Gen AI integration in teaching and assessment. So you learn about AI, but how do you use AI in the classroom are two different things. National AI education guidelines are emerging, and the feds came out with something today that I haven't had a chance to fully take account of. But in Canada, it's going to be left to the provinces because the education system resides there. So we need to align amongst provinces, or at least steal from one another on the things that work. Curriculum reform for an AI-driven economy, so training or teaching our students for what they need in the future is important, and it has changed. And finally, we have to balance the opportunities with the risks that are very real. I want to take a step back to the purpose of education. We keep circling back to some themes that have transcended time. We need to develop critical thinkers and creativity and stop yanking it out of our students. Building relationships and social emotional skills. That ability to communicate as well as to work in groups is critically important and more important in the future with AI. Fostering curiosity, resilience, and agency. We have to make sure the human continues to be the one that is in control, whether it's the student, the teacher, or the employee. Preparing student for an uncertain time. So what are those skills that we can impart on those students, knowing that the future they step into a year from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, can't fully be imagined today. And finally, nurturing what makes us human. Education is fundamentally a human process, which revolves around the relationship between teacher and student. We released an education plan earlier this week, and the idea behind our students feeling like they belong is critically important. If you don't feel like you belong in the education system, you can't learn. So, key uses. We have teacher prep. That's the easy one. That's the one where the teacher is going to get a little bit less workload so that they have more time to work with students one-on-one and make that human connection and make them feel like they belong. Learning and teaching, and that's where integrating into the curriculum comes back. And then that whole piece around changing the assessment system. If we simply layer on AI, you make your student go home and write an essay, shockingly, they're going to cheat. However, if you encourage them to use AI, but they have to show their prompts and how they QA'd the thing, then you're evaluating the process. So the approach that we've taken, we have a policy on ICT use. It probably needs some updating, shockingly, because things are changing so rapidly. We have a technology plan, and we have a recommended approach to generative AI. Those are those foundational documents that nobody reads. So it's why we've taken the step of integrating it into the curriculum. We've had a digital literacy framework, which we've updated. I think the last time was 2024. We've updated again. But when we check with teachers about whether they are familiar with what's in it, shockingly, they're not. So taking that step of integrating into the curriculum and changing the way we do things is a step that we heard from the system was required. We didn't do this because government wanted to do it. We did it because we've been listening to the system. What do students need and what do teachers need? Because this is different, we do need to give lots of opportunity and time to learn, and we can't wait for perfection. So we've rolled this out to all of the teachers in New Brunswick in draft form and said, give us your comments. Did we get it right? And in a few spots, we are going to acknowledge that we haven't, and we'll adapt by the time that we roll this out fully. So there are 6 components that are woven through the K-12 integration. Digital citizenship, ethical AI use has been added to that. Digital health and wellness, so that whole idea behind the algorithms and the targeted advertising impacts health and wellness. We have to teach about that. Critical inquiry and meaning making, so AI-generated content, biases, hallucinations. Why does that happen? What do you have to look out for? Creativity, design, and problem solving, so AI as a creative collaborator, not the one doing all of the thinking or the creating. Communication and collaboration, so it's great that you use it, but being able to then communicate and explain and talk to your peers and working groups are all critically important going forward. And finally, as we get into those later years of the K-12 system, that computational thinking, how AI systems actually work, how they're trained, it's important to know that fundamentally as you go off to the working world. So we open the curriculum documents and we actually put in guiding questions and purposeful integration aligned. Age alignment was really important. You're not going to teach the same thing in kindergarten as grade 12. In fact, you're not going to allow them to have independent use of AI in K-5. This is something that is pretty commonly accepted across the globe as this is happening. K-5, you're teaching about it, but you're demoing it, but you're not actually putting it in the hands of the students yet. Whereas in middle school, we were just up the hill yesterday, and the projects that were done by middle school students using AI were phenomenal. We are in really good shape, and I see a couple people in the audience who are there. We are in phenomenally good shape if those kids continue to innovate the way they showed us yesterday. there was tremendous department and school district collaboration. Again, this wasn't created on the 4th floor, Place 2000 downtown. It was done with the system, and it's why we released it in draft so that we get teacher perspective as well. And finally, again, it's critically important that we get it right from an age perspective. What is acceptable to a 10-year-old is not the same thing that's acceptable to a 16 or an 18-year-old. And I'm going to say, as the debate in Canada and elsewhere revolves around banning social media, we had an opportunity 10 years ago to do media literacy. And we missed our opportunity, and now we're where we are. We can't allow ourselves to do that with AI. We've got to get this right. It means starting and iterating as we go forward. The education plan has a system catalyst in it. It's a nod to the fact that we don't know what we don't know about where we're going, but we know it's going to fundamentally change our system. So the education plan embraces AI as a catalyst that touches curriculum, assessment, teaching, and student learning across the system. So we have taken the stance that students are going to learn with, through, about, and without AI, depending on the topic, depending on the class, and depending on the age. So the power of relationship, human connection, and critical thinking remains more important than ever, and we protect that in these curriculum document updates. AI is here. That part, it's hard to debate. So we can be best prepared, and we can best prepare our students by engaging with it. Aligning the technology plan, again, we updated it. Making sure we bring AI in the classroom in a really purposeful, intentional way at the right moments. And we're one of the first movers in Canada because we were able to do it with the district. So individual districts are doing this in other provinces, maybe ahead of us. But as a system in Canada, we happen to be ahead. And finally, the system supports are in place. The training, the professional learning, the time is going to be critical in getting this right because our teachers are learning along with their students. So what does system leadership look like? We set clear system guardrails before scaling use. We prioritize professional learning. We embed AI within the curriculum. And that, again, means about AI and with AI, depending on the subject as well as the age. And we align senior and district leadership, and I can tell you that it is. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for your talk. I should mention that I was so lucky to see it from the close enough to the great job that you're doing. It is amazing. And from one of the project that one of the high school student has finished, it was amazing. It was at the university level. I was so impressed. So thank you so much.
Yeah, the university wants to go snatch him up real quick because it was pretty good.
Yeah. So we have time for the question from audience.
Monsieur Bata.
Hi, Ryan. Where's the resistance? Where's the friction going to come from as you head down the path?
So the friction is coming from a few different areas. Teachers feel unprepared, but tell us that they need the guidance. But are we moving too fast by giving them the guidance? So we've got a little bit of a push and pull from a pocket of teachers. That's true of any change we do in education. It's true of any change we do in the corporate world or in government. So it's about working with them. The last 3 years, as we've grappled with this, the more use cases, the more ability to play with it. We started with those who raised their hand and wanted to do it so that they can convince the resistors. It's not true that I can stand in front of a stage of teachers and tell them that this is the right thing and they're going to go, oh yeah, okay, sure. We're also going to get it from parents. Mostly though, once you get to have that conversation about that appropriate age use and where we've landed, that seems to dial it down some. But it is a change management exercise. There are lots of conversations to come, and it's an acknowledgement as well that this is going to change. We're going to iterate this. What is here today versus 5 years from now versus 10 years from now will be different, but we want to start today.
Thanks for your talk. Like yourself, I haven't absorbed all of the Carney announcement from like an hour and a half ago, but there is a lot in there on literacy programs, and a lot of it is for post-secondary. And these are all federal programs. I'm wondering to what extent you and your colleagues at the other Atlantic provinces can maybe coordinate on sort of an Atlantic approach to getting some of this literacy funds in the region.
So we collaborate a fair bit. We don't launch off by ourselves. So we've been looking at what's been working in different jurisdictions and in Canada and around the world, because the challenges that we have and the opportunities that we have happen to be really common across the globe right now in education. The problems aren't much different. Some systems are starting from way behind, some systems are ahead, but we're all grappling with the same things. So if you look at the approaches, either guiding documents that aren't necessarily curriculum in other provinces, we're all pretty aligned. They might take a different tact on age and so on, but we're sharing openly with each other, always do, and will continue to.
Thank you, Ryan. I was there yesterday, but I didn't get to see their presentations. I'm sure they did amazing work. One specific question, you do have a bilingual environment. Any particular challenge arising from that environment and any strategy you use to mitigate?
So it actually is an opportunity. The diverseness of our education system today is an absolute gift. But being able to use AI to help with some of our multilingual learners has been a real opportunity. The piece that I would say we need to be careful of is the cultural piece, especially when it comes to our First Nations. So that is something that we're going to have to be really intentional about.
Thank you for your talk. A couple of days, the report on the literacy in New Brunswick came out, and one thing was clear was we have a two-tiered system that we evolved towards. What is going to be, in your opinion, the effect of AI, and how can we actually mitigate that kind of stuff?
So if I come back to the Brookings Institute, if we do what we're doing today, we're going to allow cognitive offload, and because kids are using it. So we have to change the way that we do assessment. We have to change the way that we're using it within the classroom. There's a difference between screen time and ed tech, AI literacy, AI use, and then social media. Some people are really mixing all of these. With regard to literacy, in our plan, the education plan, we are going to be blocking off time specifically for literacy and numeracy, so that it's intentionally done. We make sure that that's not something that we give up as we introduce some of these other pieces like AI or field trips seems to be the one you default to, but you can integrate a field trip into your curriculum pretty easy. So I hesitate to go too far there, but it's about being intentional. We acknowledge everything that was said. The last education plan, we didn't accomplish what we should have. The last 3 years with the long-term recommendations that were put out by the previous government and held over with the current government, we've actually been accomplishing what we set out, and we're taking a very similar approach to the new education plan. So a literacy strategy from K to 8. So that's the other piece, is we keep swinging the pendulum from high school to elementary, but we forget the middle school piece. Well, those who won't have benefited from some of the changes that we were making or have made recently around the science of reading need to be caught up in middle school. So we're taking all of those steps. The plan is really about focusing on those basics first, as well as preparing students for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the talk. Thanks. Thank you. So I would like to invite our two next speakers, Ms. Rose Boudreau and Ms. Sana Kashgouli from CGI, and one of our amazing donors to AI Summit. Ms. Boudreau is a technical consultant and data scientist with CGI's Atlantic Business Unit. And Mrs. Kashgouli is data scientist specialized in scalable data-driven AI solutions and advanced algorithm design. They co-lead AIX at CGI.
Thank you so much, Mahtab. Hi, everyone. I'm Sana. I will be doing the first half of the talk. In the second half, my colleague Rose is going to do it. So we're going to talk about the common ground in AI. So everyone thinks of AI in a different way: a reliable assistant, a not so reliable assistant, a know-it-all, a hallucinator, a threat, or just another extra cost. It's very important to address that all these feelings are valid because everyone's experience with AI is different. When my hairdresser found out that I work in the field of AI, he immediately asked me, "Do you think AI is going to take my job?" And I was like, no. And it made me think on a serious level, what kind of interaction with AI makes us feel stressed or that fear, anxiety, and what is there that makes us feel negative about it? Because the pattern that I've noticed is that most of AI experts feel generally positive about AI, and it's because they know AI's strengths and its weaknesses. They know exactly where AI can be helpful and exactly where it breaks. And I think that clarity keeps the anxiety away. As a matter of fact, sometimes AI does not behave in the way that we expect intelligence to behave. And here's a very recent example that some of you might have seen. And for those of you who haven't, I encourage you to test it yourself. So this is very recent, 2026. Someone asked some of the LLMs, the top tier models, this question. I want to take my car to the car wash. The car wash is 50 meters away. Should I walk or drive? And some of these top tier models answered, definitely walk. There is no point driving that short of a distance. So moments like these are great, not because some of the models fail, but because they pull us back to the reality of what AI is. As we all know, AI doesn't reason the way you and I reason. Broadly speaking, these models are generating responses by drawing on patterns they've seen before on large, huge amounts of data and calculating, okay, what's likely the most useful response at the moment. On the other hand, humans' intelligence, creativity, problem solving, the ability to reason about things that we have never seen before comes naturally to us. And it's in the name. It's the opposite of artificial. And it makes sense that we cannot expect everything that comes naturally to us from AI. And once everyone genuinely embraces what AI is, what it's good at, where it falls, what it does, like why it does what it does, and more importantly, what it isn't, then maybe that fear can start changing to curiosity, and we can change the conversation to, okay, what can I do with AI that I was not doing before? And here's a concrete example. Wait a second. We should be here. So when I say chemists or chemistry, the picture that might come to mind is that someone in a white lab coat in a lab environment, having goggles on and having this mysterious green liquid in a flask and a beaker, doing experiments. But from my time as an AI researcher and developer at a chemistry lab, I can tell you that the reality was different. I saw that about half of the time that chemists do their work, it's spent behind their laptops and computers. They search the literature, they read through paper after paper, and they are looking to see if one specific thing in a paper is relevant to their work. And they need to repeat that process over and over again for all those papers that they will be finding. And on top of that, they need to benchmark dozens of features that is relevant to their work. And by the way, there is no standard way that chemists report these values. So on top of that, they would need to do a constant unit conversion just to make sure everything is unified and is what they want to work with. So it's a mind-blowing amount of time spent just behind the computers before anyone even goes to the lab and does the actual manual work. So the crazy part for me wasn't the gap between my imagination of a chemist and what it is in reality, but it was the fact that in that chemistry department, only one of the labs was leveraging AI to speed up the paper finding, the data extraction, the benchmarking process, which, by the way, was very significant. They were reducing the time from weeks spent on all of those processes down to a day or two. So we see a lot of organizations, businesses, academic teams using AI. They get it, they love it, and that's amazing. But once we step outside of that bubble, even slightly, we can see there are so many opportunities where AI can help, but just isn't. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's the fact that people might not feel hopeful that the technology is going to work, what about the security part of it, et cetera. And sometimes it's just the fact that they just don't know AI is out there and can help them with the most redundant and time-consuming part of their work. And on that note, I'm going to hand it over to Rose. She's going to talk about how after the deployment of AI can look like. Rose?
Hi, everyone. So continuing on the subject, we decided to look at the common ground because we've noticed that throughout this AI adoption phase, there's been a lot of controversy. So instead of shying away from it, we thought we'd try to address some of it. So when we hear people talk about AI, one of the main fears that we're hearing is that of replacement and automation. But the actual landscape of the work that we need to do in society these days is looking a lot different. So we're a couple decades behind climate adaptation. We have wealth inequality and asset inflation bearing down on our economies. And that's just to name a few of the elephants in the room. So what we decided to do was look at how can we frame AI in a way that might actually help us to address some of these issues instead of just kind of giving up and letting this next technical revolution settle into another monopolized situation. So the more useful question we can ask ourselves is, how do we deploy AI thoughtfully enough to meet work that has already outpaced us? Because what we can see is that we're facing a demographic crisis. On top of all of these problems that I've previously mentioned, we still need society to function as it is while we address major species-threatening crises. So thinking about how we can address this principled issue is a much more nuanced ask than whether we use it or we don't. You can see how we're kind of addicted to these false binaries because they're simpler to hold in our minds, but we need to add more nuance to the discussion. So another binary I find myself hung up on is how debates about technology have focused on human fault, what we get wrong, where our attention fails, where our bias creeps in, and where scale exposes our limits or our planning gaps. But the framing keeps the conversation on the defensive and what we're protecting against. But if we take the chance to deploy AI well, we can shift that conversation towards human virtue and what we can bring to the table when we take away the complexity and scale of society as it operates today. So those virtues look like judgment, care, the ability to sit with a difficult decision, the moral imagination to ask who's missing from the room. When AI carries the weight of that scale and complexity and repetition, those capacities have more room to operate. People get to spend their time on the parts of their work that matters the most. That's the promise, and that's why we're trying to be specific when we develop our applied AI systems. The most meaningful wins comes from that specificity. So you can see that when you think of a nurse, you're thinking of someone who cares, right? You're in pain, you're going through a difficult time. You don't imagine that a nurse spends hundreds of hours doing work to keep up with insurance policies or different mandates. Even though these might be important complexities of the role, that's not what comes to mind, because at its core, nursing is care work. So when we allow AI to handle some of that complexity, we free up the nurse to do more of the work that is meaningful. A more practical example from AIX with Sana and I, we just freed up a credit union from 400 hours of a week of work reading SQL Server readouts. If anyone's done that, not the best, but that's required for audit logs so people can know where the money's moving. That's also really important work, but 400 hours a week, that's 400 hours we gave back to community, to a bank that's focused on delivering accessible economic financial tools to you and me, to people who are not large investment firms or super huge participants in the stock market. So that's the type of meaning I'm trying to parse out and the type of nuance I'm trying to add to the conversation. But this approach asks something of all of us. It asks our leaders to resist the pull of speed for speed's sake. We don't need AI in and of itself as its own goal. It asks where the real bottlenecks are, the ones that are costing us this capacity and this quality and our ability to serve the purposes we feel our technologies represent or our roles represent. Sorry, I just remembered I forgot the slides. Too busy talking. But yeah, so we need to ask ourselves to build out for the edge cases so we can build trust in these types of technologies and move ourselves back to addressing the real elephants in the room of society. Like, we have existential problems. There's plenty of work. We don't need to worry about automation. We need to worry about sitting together and making the right call when we're in those rooms, because the complexity and the overcapacity is handled. So yeah, that's the real opportunity for augmentation, using AI to take on what scale and complexity have made unmanageable so that human judgment is freed up for the questions that actually benefit from it. Because there's more that needs doing, and we want people to be focused on the parts of work that only they can do well. That's the shift we believe in. It's nuanced, it's not stuck in a duality, and we hope you come along with us for the journey. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your talk. Thank you, Rose. Thank you, Sana. We would like to, do we have some questions from the audience? I have two questions. So there are layoffs happening, and how do you explain the gap between the clarity reduces fears and what we see in reality?
In reality, yeah. Sure. Thanks for that question. I think what we're seeing now is what I addressed at the beginning. So asset inflation and wealth inequality, we need to be in those rooms for those conversations. We need to be able to free up our society to continue to operate. But we also need to, so that way we can come together and decide how our society should benefit from the wealth that's created from this new technology, instead of just allowing all of the wealth to settle at the top through asset classes that demand a return on their investment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And so we don't know that what we don't know. How can people outside of AI know what they can use it without being exposed of it?
I think that's a really good question. I also apologize if I was yelling at my part. I'm very used to yelling at the microphone. So yeah, that is a really good question because the people that are not using AI are completely outside of it, and when they hear it, they might have a wrong perception about it. So I feel like the first step is that if we see someone that doesn't know anything about AI, it's a really good practice to give them a good impression and give them like a clarity of AI isn't perfect. There are parts that it can be very helpful and parts that it's not. See what is the very time-consuming part of your job, and probably AI can give you some help in that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yep.
In your example of the credit union, I think that reduced their number of hours looking at SQL output by 400 hours per week.
Yep.
Just curious, do you know if they planned on reducing their workforce because of that?
There's no plan for them to reduce their workforce, no, because they still have plenty of work to do to deliver to community. I can't give too many client specifics, but they're still growing. So this is capacity they really needed in order to be able to compete with large, like monopolied banking industry that we have here in Canada. So that capacity frees them up to offer more community-based financial instruments.
Plus internal.
That's good, thank you.
Yeah, I was just gonna add plus the internal knowledge as well, right? So they need those people to pass that along to each other still. So yeah, just to complement that. That was perfect though.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think exactly goes to the same description about the firemen and the. Do we have more questions?
Sure. Yeah, I'm curious, Rose, because you mentioned climate adaptation being one of the gaps that is stressing workloads for government employees and so forth. How do you think about the role of AI in sort of exacerbating our climate adaptation needs and also its benefits to sort of address the problem of climate change?
I see what you mean there. There's a tension between this being the technology to provide us the capacity while also affecting the environment. Great question. I think we need to be able to move from focusing on survival as a working class so we can have the nuanced conversations about how we want AI to impact the climate. Like, what is the cost benefit that we are willing to accept? But we need to decide that together as a society instead of just like allowing the decision to be made for us. So I guess that's my own stance on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sana. Thank you so much, Rose. Thank you so much for a great talk and the discussion.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
So I would like to introduce our last guest to this talk, Dr. Rachel Hoare. Dr. Rachel Hoare is an executive doctorate of business administration candidate at Sobey's School of Business, St. Mary University, and technology consulting practitioner specializing in AI risk and compliance across the FSI sector. Dr. Rachel Hoare's talk is titled From Dyadic Trust to Trust Ecology, Reframing Trust in AI Augmented Decision Systems. Please, we would like to welcome you to the talk. The floor is yours. Thank you.
I guess being the last speaker, I perhaps am holding everybody up from the break that supposedly was at 2:15, right? But you know what? I think the food is not ready yet. So you have to bear with me. All right. So good afternoon, everybody. I think, we've heard about how AI generate codes and what makes computer science matter more than ever when the first speaker started talking. And we've talked about access and what responsible AI looks like in the New Brunswick classroom. And I think these are really vital conversations. But many of us used AI for something that wasn't a classroom exercise, a job application, a credit decision, a claim, and maybe even a second chance at something that mattered to us. And in those moments, the question wasn't whether the system was accurate. It was whether we believed it. And that pause between AI's output and our willingness to act on it is what I actually study. And I want to suggest that that pause is getting harder, longer, and more consequential by the day. Because AI isn't a tool anymore. It's in the room, it has a seat on the table, but it doesn't have a name on the door. And that is not a technical problem, it's a relational one. And I would say that we don't have a grammar for it yet. And here I'm wanting to share the shift between a dyadic trust, where we're talking about two humans in the room, or human and AI, to something built better for the world that we're actually in. So I'm going to talk about the trust ecology framework. Did my slides switch? Yeah? Okay. I just got to make sure because I can't be sure. So let me give you 3 pictures. A credit algorithm denies your mortgage. You ask why, and the model can't explain. Neither can the bank, and you get a silence. And that is AI explicability failing. And you have a triage model that delays your cancer diagnosis, and the clinician actually says, oh, I trusted the system, but the system was wrong, and there's no one standing between you and that failure. That is human stewardship failing. And you have a sentencing tool that inflates your risk score, and imagine you got to go to prison longer, but the system says that it's neutral, and you feel the injustice. That's systemic legitimacy failing. In every one of these situations, someone looks up and asks, who do I hold accountable? And we would say that the system might say, yeah, no one in particular. So to me, that is a chilling gap. It's not a legal risk. It's not a reputational one, but an existential barrier to AI actually delivering value at scale. And that's where my research actually started. So why does this keep happening? I believe it's because the framework we're working from were built for a very different world. So I'm going to touch a little bit on theory here. So canonically, Mayer, Russo, and Coquet were built for humans because it assumes humans as trustee, which is someone with clear intent, a stable identity, a bilateral relationship that you can navigate. But with AI coming into the picture, it shatters every one of the assumptions. Intent is no longer located in a person. It's actually distributed across the model, the data, and the design choices made years before a decision actually happening. So accountability has diffused across the vendor, the deployer, the regulator, and the user until no one is actually holding it. And most dangerously, failure does not stay in the present. Think about every time you've been told that the process was fair. And now imagine discovering years later that the system making those calls was broken from the start. Not just wrong today, wrong then, and wrong the whole time. That retroactive collapse is where failure in the present reaches back and poisons every decision that came before it. And this is what I call a trust rewind. Think about Compass, a tool that was used in US sentencing. When researchers found that it was racially biased, in every prior sentence it influenced became a suspect overnight. Not a present error, but a rewind. It is the most dangerous thing that AI does to trust. And no existing framework can actually see that happening. In my study, I came across 74% of the existing trust framework is actually dyadic. 2 humans, or AI and a human. And no model is actually built to look at this based on this new ecological reality. So I would like to talk a little bit about the trust ecology framework. The trust ecology framework is triadic, is processual, and is ecologically coupled. So we're looking at three interdependent pillars, not because three is a tidy number, but because trust in AI actually fails in exactly three ways, and those failures do not stay contained. One being explicability. Can the system account for itself? Not just to interpret the output, but to trace it, to audit, and to show its work. Stewardship. Are humans in the loop truly accountable, not just named, but empowered, not just present, but responsible? Systemic legitimacy. Are the outcomes perceived as fair by everyone affected across time, including the people who never got to appeal? So those actually form something I call the Trust Fidelity Index. And here's what makes the framework dangerous to ignore. A failure in one of any of these pillars does not stay isolated. It actually propagates, and it cascades, and it rewinds. The pillar that fails first is rarely the one that destroys trust, and is actually the one that unlocks the others. So I'd like you to draw your attention to this diagram, because I think this is what's really important. So two features that makes this framework structurally different, and I have a third that reframes them both. First, this retroactive cascade is the heart of the framework, the part that I hope you will remember after you leave the summit. Failure does not stay in present, it cascades backwards. An algorithm didn't make a bad decision today. It reaches back and stole fairness from yesterday. Once a system fails, every decision it ever made becomes a suspect. Every loan, every diagnosis, every grade, all of it. The second is repair sequencing. You cannot fix trust just by throwing transparency at the problem. Boeing published an explainability report on the failure of 737 MAX, and they explained the MCAI system in detail, but the trust actually collapsed anyway. But no one had demonstrated that governance had actually changed. And explanation without accountability is actually noise. I would argue that you must restore trust in order, looking at legitimacy, stewardship, and explicability. And if you were to actually repair them, not in an order, you actually accelerate distrust. The third point that I want to make, which is most important, is that agentic AI actually removes all this trust entirely. All the assumptions made earlier. There is no moment, no decision that you can point to, because an agentic system coordinating, say, insurance underwriting, fraud detection, and claims processing does not just make one bad call, it drifts. And by the time a problem surfaces in the outcome, it's actually running for months and probably already made thousands of decisions. And this is why I would say that TEF, which is the Trust Ecology Framework, is not a post hoc tool. If you want to know where to diagnose and where to intervene across the design, training, deployment, or continuous operation, I've got that mapped. So I would invite you to come talk to me. Now, I want to also share that this framework is grounded in evidence. I've done a systematic review across 67 studies that actually compounded 31,400 participants. And what I found really surprised me. Everybody talks about transparency building trust. And actually, I was wrong. The pool effect of transparency on trust is actually not significant. And the heterogeneity across the study was 99.5. So in very simple English terms, transparency does not have universal effect on trust. However, context does the work. So it depends on your sector, your stakes, your reversibility, who's watching and who's vulnerable. Those are the variables that actually matter. So single score trust model fail because you're ignoring the ecological interplay between explicability, stewardship, and the legitimacy. The review that I conducted did not disapprove AI, but it just proves that simple models are actually very dangerous. Now, let me show you what that looks like in the real world. I have two case studies that I want to talk about. One is on the US Medicare that happened in 2023. An AI model setting a post-acute care coverage limits for elderly patients. 90% of denials were overturned on appeal. A model that wrong is not a decision support tool, it's a denial engine. Internal communications were later produced in discovery showing that the insurer's own medical directors flagged the model's error rate, but the decision was to continue. Not because the errors were acceptable, but because the denials were profitable. So, some patients sadly did not survive long enough to actually win the appeal. That is a classic example of human stewardship failure. And because why? The humans in the loop knew about it, but they choose continuity over accountability. So once exposed, every prior denial becomes a potential wrongful act, and the failure reaches backward to every decision that was made over time. And the federal discovery was ordered in March 2026. And this is not a compliance failure, but is a trust rewind at a scale of human life. Now, I chose this second example because we are in a university. And this second case is what I really want you to sit with. And it could also relate to maybe your children as well. It's a few years old, a bit dated, but I think the wounds are really still legible. Back in 2020, when the exam grading in the United Kingdom was actually conducted post-COVID, you can see that these numbers are not statistics, right? It's something so simple for the government that they will never think about it again, that affected the rest of my life. And why don't I feel like living anymore? I feel that my hard work has gone to waste. This is a sign of algorithms stealing people's future. So when algorithm was struck down, it didn't affect future grades. It retroactively rewrote the entire generation's academic records. A single decision by a failed system does not end in the present. It reaches back through every decision that came before it, and it strips all the legitimacy at once. And that's a retroactive cascade. I think there is no framework that actually sees this. And I hope that what I'm sharing with you will be able to reveal that. This is what's at stake, and here's what we do about it. I think TAF maps directly onto existing regulatory architecture, and I would not like to elaborate too long about this slide because I think everybody is starting to get really impatient. And I do not opt to normally be the last speaker, but it wasn't by choice. So I like to just say that, at the bottom half of the slide, when we're talking about how Monday looks like for most people, if you're a regulator, I think audit legitimacy coherence at the point of deployment approval is critical. It's not an incident investigation, and a system without audit trail actually fails explicability before decisions are being made. I think we have industry people here, and I want to say that if you're a vendor, ship the Trust Fidelity Index score with every model that you're building. Make trust disclosable, not just defensible. Build a rollback plan before you build a go-live plan. And I want to say that chief risk officers, you have to start having people as human in the loop that can actually override. You need accountability as much as empowerment to actually make this work. And if you're a researcher or if you're a student that would like to really investigate this more, there is a trust scale that you can actually start exploring. Now, please bear with me for a second. I do want to talk about two metrics. One is the Net Promoter Score that tells you if they like you, and the customer satisfaction score that tells you if they're satisfied today. I'm talking about the trust triad scale that has 25 items that tells you where trust is fracturing and where to pull your lever first. It is a diagnostic profile. It is not a single score because trust in AI is not a single score. Use it prospectively at the design stage before deployment to tell you which dimension has already degraded before anyone is harmed. This is my favorite slide. I want to say that every system that had failed had a calm before it. Can we learn that calm before everyone is harmed? This is where this goes next. There's three things I want to leave with you because of the diverse audience. Theoretically, a structural model that demonstrates triadic, processual, and ecological coupled trust is empirical. I've studied it enough and welcome everybody else that wants to study along with me as well, that transparency alone is not enough. However, I would say that this is a diagnostic tool that can be applied, and we talked about application so much yesterday, and this is what we're building for AI that actually breaks. Now, with everybody's patience, I would like to say that we build AI systems that shape consequential decisions. We restructured the conditions under which trust can form and fail across entire institutions. The question is no longer whether your system is accurate, but whether legitimacy, coherence is intact. That's the phrase I want you to remember before deployment, not after discovery. And we're talking about trust re-engineered, and this is the framework that I built. And if you're building, you're regulating, or you're auditing any of your system, and you feel the gap that I've described, I encourage that you come find me or find my supervisor, Dr. Michael Chang, that's standing there, to build a better framework as we embrace AI together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hoare. I'm so sorry about the time. So because of the time, we are not able to take questions, but we really appreciate for your talk and really...
We can have questions during the break.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yes.
Is that a fair thing? Oh, all right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.